Well, I hope this week isn't too reading heavy. There are a lot of readings, but it's because they were so good. There were so many amazing readings on this topic.
Tests and calamities.
Tests and calamities and sacrifice. So among the...
Why do I feel like every week is for me?
Yeah, this week is for all of us. And so among the themes across all world religions, the essence of the prophets past is the fact that this world at some level is a world of suffering, a world that demands something of us, that demands a response to suffering, sometimes to the extent of the sacrifice of our own lives, and a world in which wealth is followed by poverty, in which there's unpredictability of circumstances, and the spiritual reasons for that are given in the Baha'i writings, as well as in other places. But so the Baha'i take on the meaning of tests and calamities is introduced here in the Hidden Words, and we will also have a number of very lovely additional passages on them. Although I grouped everything under the overall category of tests and calamities and sacrifice, bad stuff, it seemed to me that it broke out into three pretty well-defined subsections. There's a section on sacrifice of self to the point of martyrdom. There's a section on tests more in general, and then there's a section on how wealth may be followed by poverty and abasement. But I felt they were closely enough related to group them all together. So, as before, why don't we read through, first of all, the hidden words themselves on this, and then pause and then look at these lovely supporting passages.
So you want to pause at the line?
Yeah, let's pause at the line for comments. O son of being, seek a martyr's death in my path, content with my pleasure, thankful for that which I ordain, that thou mayest repose with me beneath the canopy of majesty behind the tabernacle of glory.
O Son of Man, ponder and reflect. Is it thy wish to die upon thy bed, or to shed thy lifeblood on the dust, a martyr in my path, and so become the manifestation of my command and the revealer of my light in the highest paradise? Judge thou aright, O servant.
O Son of Man, by my beauty, to tinge thy hair with thy blood is greater in my sight than the creation of the universe and the light of the world. Strive then to attain this, O servant.
Tests. O Son of Man, for everything there is a sign. The sign of love is fortitude under my decree and patience under my trials.
O Son of Man, the true lover yearneth for tribulation, even as doth the rebel for forgiveness, and the sinful for mercy.
O Son of Man, if adversity befall thee not in my path, how canst thou walk in the ways of them that are content with my pleasure? If trials afflict thee not in thy longing to meet me, how wilt thou attain the light in thy love for my beauty?
O Son of Man, my calamity is my providence. Outwardly it is fire and vengeance, but inwardly it is light and mercy. Hasten thereunto that thou mayest become an eternal light and an immortal spirit. This is my command unto thee. Do thou observe it.
O Son of Man, should prosperity befall thee, rejoice not, and should abasement come upon thee, grieve not, for both shall pass away and be no more.
O Son of Being, if poverty overtake thee, be not sad, for in time the Lord of wealth shall visit thee. Fear not abasement, for glory shall one day rest on thee.
O son of being, if thine heart be set upon this eternal and perishable dominion, and this ancient everlasting life, forsake this mortal and fleeting sovereignty.
O son of being, busy not thyself with this world, for with fire we test the gold, and with gold we test our servants.
O son of man, thou dost wish for gold, and I desire thy freedom from it. Thou thinkest thyself rich in its possession, and I recognize thy wealth and thy sanctity therefrom. By my life, this is my knowledge, and that is thy fancy. How can my way accord with thine?
O son of man, bestow my wealth upon my poor, that in heaven thou mayest draw from stores of unfading splendor and treasures of imperishable glory. But by my life, to offer up thy soul is a more glorious thing, couldst thou but see with mine eye.
So in a world which, from a theological perspective, we believe is designed for the creation to recognize its source, if that's the whole movement of the universe, is that the one becomes many and the many becomes one. If in another way of putting that, if the purpose of creation is that the source of being which loved creation in turn is loved by its creation, then why is it so hard? Why does it have to be hard? Why can't it just be like an eternal party of self-recognition and love?
My mother used to say, I know, God, you love me, because you give me these tests. I know that's because you love me. But do you have to love me so hard?
Well, it does make you wonder, because it seems cruel. It seems cruel to want your loved ones to suffer, and to create this system where suffering becomes like necessary to achieve whatever it is. That's a little bit troublesome to me. I don't understand.
Yeah.
How is it consistent with God's love and mercy? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Our writings talk about your children must endure hardship.
Accustom them to hardship.
Accustomed to hardship.
Well, and I
I mean,
understand.
I don't know what that means, but
I understand that it is.
You see
that way.
Leon going through it.
yeah.
I understand that it is that way, and I can see how it works. I just don't understand why it needed to be created that way.
One way forward in these sorts of questions is to assume the counterfactual. So, okay, suppose there's a world in which there is no suffering. We have just what we wanted. Try to imagine what that world would be like. Try to imagine how you would live in that world, what you would do when you woke up in the morning, what kind of goals you would have, how you would grow as a person, or would you grow as a person?
And presupposes we're human.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
And how would you know what's good?
Yeah.
How would you identify what's good?
The only reason we know what's good now is because the manifestations come and teach us, right? So that could still happen.
I think the other thing too is how much of it is stuff that we cause and how much of it is really something from a higher source. I mean, so much I think of suffering is really what our thoughts and our behaviors and our emotions in action, and really comes from us, the suffering.
so I don't know that I think God ordains our suffering. I feel like because we're human, we have ego structures.
Yeah.
And that inevitably creates a collision with our connecting with God.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why we are created with ego structures.
Well, it was for our survival. I mean, that ego, the way the brain works, evolutionarily speaking,
all of those fight, flight reactions were required for our physical survival, but they're just maladaptive over time because they don't serve us anymore. Those things that used to serve us on the the woolly mammoth and saber-toothed tiger don't serve us, but we still use that in our interactions with people. And I feel like that's what manifestations have probably come to tell us, is that don't go with your base instinct.
Yeah.
We're talking about suffering as though it were some objective fact of the universe, like the temperature is this versus that. But what if suffering were a subjective reality, not an objective reality? Then we would make sense of this hidden word where Baha'u'llah says, my calamity is my providence, outwardly fire and vengeance, inwardly light and mercy. What does he mean by that? He could be meaning that depending on how we approach it, depending on how we look at it, we could experience what some people would experience as total devastation and calamity. Someone with a different frame of reference might experience the same thing as divine providence, in a way, and from that perspective of like true submission to the will of the divine, one would then not suffer, or
Well, but wait a minute. Does that mean if I touch my finger on a hot stove,
it wouldn't hurt? Yeah.
there's a world in which that might not hurt? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, that's a good counter argument.
Yeah.
That's a good counterpoint. There is pain in the world. Pain is an objective thing.
Oh, okay.
So maybe we can refine the argument
it's
and
a
say
suffering.
pain isn't an objective
But
thing.
pain is
But
still
this-
relative, though,
Yeah.
because there's pain that people experience that others would just, faint, and other people would just sort of go, yeah, I'm in pain and I'm dealing with it, coping. Now, maybe the pain itself, how do you measure pain? Physical pain. You go to the doctor and say, what is it on a scale of 1 to 10, and they take that into consideration because, for one person, that hangnail is the worst thing that's ever happened to them, and somebody else, that kidney stone is, I've had much worse than this, and I've been in those situations, and I think about it, and I go, wait a minute, for that person with the hangnail, this is devastating to them because they cannot handle this pain. They're not used to it. But if I had that hangnail, I wouldn't be complaining. I'd be, that's annoying.
So physiologically, people have different pain tolerances. But beyond the pain of a hot stove, and let's, concede that different people will like hurt more or less by things like hot stoves, there's still this kind of suffering of what life has dealt you, and that's connected to this: you're rich, and then tomorrow you're poor, and for some that's the occasion of deepest suffering. That's not physical pain. Now we're talking about suffering in a more like existential sense, and depending on where you're at, maybe sometimes it could be suffering from one perspective, but not from another. And going back to Barbara's point, if the source of suffering in some way is ego, then maybe that gives us a clue as to what the purpose of it is. It's to help us get out of the ego. If the purpose of creation is for the many to become one again, which involves letting go of the ego, then maybe the two are connected. Maybe the suffering is to remind us of that ego and to help us get out of it.
I'm sorry, arguing here. I'm building on Kim's point. Why in the world are we seeking the most great peace? Aren't we losing a whole lot by having peace and not having our fair share of misery?
Maybe the most great peace does not imply no suffering. Maybe it just means no more war. But maybe on an individual level, people will still have tests and difficulties in their lives. There's still going to be hatred. There's still going to be...
I think about a reference point and a difference in a reference point. Like somebody can go into moments in their life and just feel utterly depressed and lonely and isolated, and from the viewpoint of themselves as an individual separated from the world, from God, that's suffering. But if they just were to shift their reference point and realize that in relationship to God, not to me, my loneliness is actually a longing for union with, my Creator. And so it's abundant. It's like, it partly feels like suffering, but it's actually, there's an abundance there. It's a yearning for something that isn't fulfilled yet. It's just that shift in a reference point of, who do we belong to, ourselves or our Creator? And I sometimes think that, contemplatives, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to shift from self-orientation to, a Creator and being in the presence of that rather than, my little confined box, me.
What makes me think of that quote we had from Abdul Baha a while back, where he was talking about how he was always happy because his will was aligned with God's will. Like, it was something to that effect. It was that, if we can not want anything that God doesn't want for us, then we're always happy. And so maybe that's the key. It's pretty hard though, I think.
Yeah.
When
I think you have to suffer to become closer to God and become more spiritual, or else, we're suffering in a materialistic world. And even if you're a materialistic person, you're going to suffer from that, and you're going to have to learn that that's not the right way. And maybe you're going to suffer enough where you're going to change and be less materialistic and be more spiritual and find more peace. And so I think it just has to happen. It's just part of human nature to suffer and learn.
What's the relationship between suffering and sacrifice? Is it that suffering is something that you might only do personally, whereas sacrifice is a form of suffering that's ultimately for the sake of others?
Well, sacrifice is a willing thing that you choose to do. Suffering just happens to you. In some cases, I suppose, if it's outward, things can happen to you.
Sacrifice your life, then you suffer.
So you're saying one is voluntary and one is involuntary?
Maybe perceiving, we perceive it that way at least. If it's not, because I can imagine that our suffering, like Catherine was saying, we're doing it to ourselves, so we're just not conscious of it, perhaps. Whereas sacrifice is something. Well, and I guess there might be different forms of sacrifice as well. Sometimes you're sacrificing sort of unwillingly. You were made to have to sacrifice, if you think of it that way.
And sometimes we choose the path of tests.
Yeah.
Or we're encouraged to, it seems, in some ways, to go in the direction of tests.
That would be like in the physical sense, working out. So that, or so you want to win a marathon or something, and you're just torturing yourself. You're beating yourself up to get stronger because you know that that's what you have to do to get there.
I have found that some my better moments that the tests actually build empathy in me for others, because even if it's just I've recognized, I remember feeling like this when I went through this same thing. And so now I can be there for someone else in a better way because I've done that. I have been that person that did that. And I've gone through that.
parenting.
Right? Yeah.
And I can be less upset when I see other people suffering worse than me, I can
Yeah.
be grateful.
Yeah.
I have a point of reference to have gratitude.
Yeah, I'm a little more patient. You know, I'm a little more patient. I'm a little more understanding, less judgmental. That's for sure. Because how many times was I that person, especially in my 20s and 30s? Like, oh. Now, then you become a parent. You're like, oh.
I remember as a teacher.
Yeah, right?
You know, when I was
Until
a
we
new
became
teacher,
parents.
I was very critical of
Yeah.
parents'
Yeah.
judgment. Not maybe out loud, but
No, in our heads.
but yeah,
I was the
you
same
know,
way.
And I imagined, you know, everything I saw in my students was the fault of the parents.
Right.
You know?
Apple tree.
Yeah. Then I lived through it, and you know, parenting my own children, and it's like, oh my god.
Yeah.
I became much more compassionate and empathetic and understanding.
Yeah. Yeah, same for people who get angry or hurt or like, not always in my finest moments, but people who are angry or hurt or say something foolish or say something, you know, you're just like, been there, done that. Oh, yep. Mm-hmm. And just your own suffering from that, the feeling that you feel, that guilt or whatever, shame, whatever it is, I think that can help fine tune you to be more graceful when other people do that same thing to you. That's
Or you can feel so much better about yourself because they're so awful.
One of the themes I see everywhere, of course, in the Baha'i prayers that I've experienced, and I have the prayer book, so I know there's a few more prayers that are found in the prayer book, but it seems over and over, Baha'u'llah seems to me to do this more than Abdu'l-Baha, is all of these declamations about the extraordinary grandeur, you know, God, the all-bounteous, the all-forgiving, the all-merciful. Everything is about trying to somehow kenosis, you know, like that notion of emptying yourself, of not being, hollow reed, not being, living in the posture of yourself, and not self in the sense of, you know, a psychological dimension of my selfness is my being oriented toward me, but just how we live in the world. And I think of like Simone Weil, I don't know if you studied her. I mean, she was this amazing French mathematical genius. She was born in 1906 or something, and she died in like 1934. But she had these terrible headaches, you know, the
Migraine
headaches. You remember that? I think that was her affliction. And she wrote this whole book on affliction. And what it did for her is it gave her an awareness of how being in her body was just so hard. And she perceived that as a path toward God. And it was like the theme I see in some of the Baha'i prayers of, you know, we start as a human animal, and we are trying to sort of purge the animalness out of the soulness of who we are. And so that suffering is kind of a tool that God uses to pull us deeper into that space of soul where we can be much more familiar with the love of God as a spiritual reality, not the absence of a physical pain or something like that. But this woman was a genius, and as Hitler came along in the early 30s, and she basically gave up her life in solidarity with French people who were suffering because the Germans wouldn't let them have the food they needed to live. And so she just decided in solidarity with them, even though she's a very sickly person, she refused to eat more than anybody who was a French person on some kind of minimal dole that the Germans let them have. And she literally died from just malnutrition.
Starvation.
But she chose it. You know, she chose to go that way. She knew what that would do for her, but she loved those people. So I'm just trying to sort through the mystery of how moving toward God is really the deepest part of it, because it's ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all about God. It's not really about us, except to the extent that we reflect God more and more as we move on that path. I don't know. There's things about pain and about suffering, and the big word for her was affliction. That there's a way of being in pain where you just can't seem to escape it for some reason, and there's something in your destiny to be deeply in misery. And then she just, at some point, she said, "This is my gift. This is my gift." So there's some kind of Baha'i-ish quality to Simone Weil, I think.
Yes.
At least in terms of the prayers that I read in the Baha'i faith.
Well, why don't we read the section on tests and then come back to the section on sacrifice?
Yeah.
So this will be top of page 3.
I think it was my turn.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Verily, God hath made adversity as a morning dew upon his green pasture, and a wick for his lamp, which lighteth earth and heaven.
But for the tribulations that have touched me in the path of God, life would have held no sweetness for me, and my existence would have profited me nothing.
But for the tribulations which are sustained in thy path, how could thy true lovers be recognized? And were it not for the trials which are born for the love of thee, how could the station of such as yearn for thee be revealed?
Regarding the afflictions endured in the path of God as comfort itself, every affliction suffered for his sake is a potent remedy. Every bitterness is not but sweetness, and every abasement and exaltation. Were men to apprehend and acknowledge this truth, they would readily lay down their lives for such affliction. For it is the key to inestimable treasures, and no matter how outwardly abhorrent it has ever been, and will continue to be inwardly prized.
From time immemorial, even unto eternity, the Almighty hath tried and will continue to try his servants, so that light may be distinguished from darkness, truth from falsehood, right from wrong, guidance from error, happiness from misery, and roses from thorns.
Verily God caused not this turmoil, but to test and prove his servants. Yea, such things as throw consternation into the hearts of all men come to pass only that each soul may be tested by the touchstone of God, that the true may be known and distinguished from the false. Such things take place only that the souls of men may develop and be delivered from the prison cage of self and desire. But inasmuch as the divine purpose hath decreed that the true should be known from the false, the sun from the shadow, he hath therefore in every season sent down upon mankind the showers of tests from his realm of glory.
Know ye that trials and tribulations have from time immemorial been the lot of the chosen ones of God and his beloved, and such of his servants as are detached from all else but him, they whom neither merchandise nor traffic beguile from the remembrance of the Almighty, they that speak not till he has spoken, and act according to his commandment. Such is God's method carried into effect of old, and such will it remain in the future. Blessed are the steadfastly enduring, they that are patient under ills and hardships, who lament not over anything that befalleth them, and who tread the path of resignation.
Whatsoever occurreth in the world of being is light for his loved ones and fire for the people of sedition and strife. Even if all the losses of the world were to be sustained by one of the friends of God, he would still profit thereby, whereas true loss would be borne by such as are wayward, ignorant, and contemptuous. Although the author, Sadi, of the following saying had intended it otherwise, yet we find it pertinent to the operation of God's immutable will. Even or odd, thou shalt win the wager. The friends of God shall win and profit under all conditions, and shall attain true wealth. In fire they remain cold, and from water they emerge dry. Their affairs are at variance with the affairs of men. Gain is their lot, whatever the deal.
Whatsoever may happen is for the best, because affliction is but the essence of bounty, and sorrow and toil are mercy unalloyed, and anguish is peace of mind, and to make a sacrifice is to receive a gift. And whatsoever may come to pass hath issued from God's grace.
My only joy in this swiftly passing world was to tread the stony path of God, and to endure hard tests and all material griefs. For otherwise this earthly life would prove barren and vain, and would be death, and better would be death. The tree of being would produce no fruit. The sown field of this existence would yield no harvest. Thus it is my hope that once again some circumstance will make my cup of anguish to brim over, and that beauteous love, that slayer of souls, will dazzle the beholders again. Then will this heart be blissful, this soul blessed.
To the loyal soul, a test is but God's grace and favor, for the valiant doth joyously press forward to furious battle on the field of anguish. When the coward, whimpering with fright, will tremble and shake, so too the proficient student, who hath with great competence mastered his subjects and committed them to memory, will happily exhibit his skills before his examiners on the day of his test. So too will solid gold wondrously gleam and shine out of the assayer's fire. It is clear then that tests and trials are for sanctified souls, but God's bounty and grace. While the weak they are a calamity, unexpected and sudden, these tests, even as thou didst write, do but cleanse the spotting of self from off the mirror of the heart, till the sun of truth can cast its rays thereon. For there is no veil more obstructive than the self, and however tenuous that veil may be, at the last it will completely shut a person out and deprive him of his portion of eternal grace.
The tests and trials of God take place in this world, not in the world of the kingdom.
All calamities and afflictions have been created for man, so that he may spurn this mortal world, a world to which he is much attached. When he experiences severe trials and hardships, then his nature will recoil, and he will desire the eternal realm, a realm which is sanctified from all afflictions and calamities.
Those who suffer most attain to the greatest perfection. Tests are benefits from God, for which we should thank Him. Grief and sorrow do not come to us by chance. They are sent to us by the divine mercy for our own perfecting. Men who suffer not attain no perfection. The plant most pruned by the gardeners is that one which, when the summer comes, will have the most beautiful blossoms and the most abundant fruit. The laborer cuts up the earth with his plow, and from that earth comes the rich and plentiful harvest. The more a man is chastened, the greater is the harvest of spiritual virtues shown forth by him.
The mind and spirit of man advance when he is tried by suffering. The more the ground is plowed, the better the seed will grow, the better the harvest will be. Just as the plow furrows the earth deeply, purifying it of weeds and thistles, so suffering and tribulation free man from the petty affairs of this worldly life until he arrives at a state of complete detachment. His attitude in this world will be that of divine happiness. Man is, so to speak, unripe. The heat of the fire of suffering will mature him. Look back to the times past and you will find that the greatest men have suffered most. To attain eternal happiness, one must suffer.
Consider how at the beginning of the Christian era, the apostles were afflicted, and what torments they endured in the pathway of Christ. Every day of their lives they were targets for the Pharisees' darts of mockery, vilification, and abuse. They bore great hardship. They saw prison, and most of them carried to their lips the sweet cup of martyrdom. Now ye as well must certainly become my partners to some slight degree, and accept your share of tests and sorrows. But these episodes shall pass away, while that abiding glory and eternal life shall remain unchanged forever. Moreover, these afflictions shall be the cause of great advancement.
Not until man is tried doth the pure gold distinctly separate from the dross. Torment is the fire of test, wherein the pure gold shineth resplendently, and the impurity is burned and blackened.
As long as there will be life on earth, there will also be suffering in various forms and degrees. But suffering, although an inescapable reality, can nevertheless be utilized as a means for the attainment of happiness. This is the interpretation given by all the prophets and saints, who in the midst of severe tests and trials felt happy and joyous and experienced what is the best and holiest in life. Suffering is both a reminder and a guide. It stimulates us to better adapt ourselves to our environmental conditions, and thus leads the way to self-improvement. In every suffering, one can find a meaning and a wisdom. It is sometimes only when our suffering has passed that we become aware of its usefulness. What man considers to be evil turns often to be a cause of infinite blessings. And this is due to his desire to know more than he can. God's wisdom is indeed inscrutable to us all, and it is no use pushing too far, trying to discover that which shall always remain a mystery in our mind.
Mm-hmm. This makes me think a little bit about how, and I don't mean it flippantly, I actually mean it real, like that sacred scripture and the principles and the encouragement that they offer are really the greatest life hacks of all. Like, they are the ultimate life hack. Like, I read this great, like scriptures and writings. Because I read a great book called The Tools, which was written by 2 psychologists. And honestly, every suggestion they gave, basically Abdu'l-Baha gave it. And like you were like, wow. And it was about detachment. It was about pushing through. It was about seeing it as opportunity. Actually, sometimes going towards it.
instead of pushing away, because by pushing through, you actually would just get through faster. It was just unbelievable how often it made me think, okay, that's what religion is. It's actually just the fastest way to get to the least amount of suffering. And then this also made me think that even if this isn't true, this is the healthiest frame for the psyche to have. Like, to believe that the suffering is by something else on you. It separates you, it gives a bit of a buffer and gives some distance to it. And that could be a healthy way for you not to get too wrapped up in yourself. Because if it's happening to you for your own good, you can reframe and think of it as, okay, what do I need to learn from this? You don't spend your time like, why me? Why is this? Why that? You're like, okay, this is for a purpose. I know it's for a purpose. God, and if you believe it's God wants me to do X, so what is that? And then you kind of reorient yourself and you move in a different way. You start walking differently and carrying yourself differently with that pain.
Suffering is so much worse when you don't know why.
Yeah, and so rather than get into that perseverate,
more fear.
Yeah, instead of perseverating and spiraling in that space, if you have the reframe of why this, why now, that orients you. It moves you in a different direction. I can't always get there, but that's what I think.
I've thought that a lot too. But there's a problem with that. I mean, I've thought that a lot about, to what extent is the spiritual wisdom of the religions a matter of like hacking our limbic system, or hacking our reptilian cortex, or our primate brains, to sort of get some better outcome. In other words, to what extent is it fooling ourselves into believing something for the sake of triggering, a pro-social behavior or something like that in the end is a positive thing and a good thing, and so the ends justify the means.
Are you saying it's kind of sort of like a placebo effect?
Well, yeah, I mean,
you have this
potentially, yeah. I mean, that's the argument. So, the argument would be, it's a placebo effect, but the placebo effect is quite measurable and quite distinct, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem is, once you realize once you sort of think through and realize, oh, this is a placebo, then it stops working.
I don't know that that's true.
So you can't,
I don't know that that's true.
Really?
I don't know, no, because I think there's a neuroscience to it. I believe that our brains are designed that what you focus on, your intent, will subconsciously be planted, and that is how you will move and act in the world. That's why prayer works. Prayer is actually your subconscious. You're planting an idea in your subconscious about how you want to be or what you want to do and how you want to align yourself. And the more that you embed that and give yourself that narrative and that repetition, the more you'll see it. It's like the new car that you just got. Now you suddenly see it all the time because you now have seen that car. It is now familiar to you, and then you see it everywhere. And I think it's the same thing when you're suffering, or when you have an orientation that tells yourself to do it differently. You've planted that idea in your mind that I can see suffering in a different way if I allow myself, if I have the patience and the grace and the kindness or whatever. I'm not saying it works every time. You're married to me, so you know. But I believe that even knowing that it could be a story, that it could be a narrative, does something psychologically when you think about reframing it.
I hope you're right.
Yeah. That seems to be correct if it's after you have already believed and didn't know about the placebo. And then once you were informed of it, you've already done it, you've already gone there, and you saw that it worked. So you can go, oh, then I'm going to keep taking that placebo. Or at least, framing my mind in a way that I've done it and it works. So I don't care if it's true or not. Because I feel better when I behave this way or think this way. But it may be that you need to be deluded for a while and accept. I mean, I literally have taken pills that somebody told me, oh, this will make you feel better. And I do feel better. It's amazing. And then I found out later it was doing nothing. It was totally a placebo effect. and I stopped taking it because it cost too much.
Yeah.
It's called
Take the red pill.
homeopathics.
Now.
Sorry.
We're recording.
But anyway, as far as when it comes to aligning yourself in a, let's say, with gratitude, and that the suffering that I've gone through, I'm grateful for. When I've gotten to that point, I'm changed, and regardless of whether any of that's true, I am a happier person, and I am. So I'm going to continue to behave and think this way. It's really helpful.
I can see all this being like profoundly true from the perspective of the separation between us and God is at some level illusory. You know, at some level it's very real to us, and I think to the majority of people on the planet who follow a spiritual path, that's the way they conceive of reality. Is there's a God or a divinity or a spiritual force or out there separate from me, whereas the mystics have always said that's the veil of Maya, that veil of separateness, between me and the divine. And the early hidden words already sort of pull away that veil a bit and say, turn thy sight unto thyself, that thou mayest find me standing within thee. So if we go through this process of thinking, well, why does prayer work? And is this just a kind of self-reinforcement psychological hack, or is this God outside listening to my prayer and answering my prayer? What's the difference between them? If turn thy sight unto thyself and the God is standing within you, then a true engagement with yourself in a way that is productive of results can be a relationship to the divine in a way.
Yeah. And it almost doesn't matter.
Right?
It seems like it's one of those things that both are true, and therefore you apply them when necessary or when you feel like it. And it's fine either way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's these things that are the multiplicity of perspectives, and they're all true, but
this only works in a non-dogmatic framework. It doesn't work in a dogmatic framework where there's like a correct formulation of understanding our relationship to God, because then you can't, it becomes incompatible with a particular dogmatic crystallization. But if you're open to the possibility of there being different languages of the divine, and in one language of the divine, your prayer is having a conversation with God, and God is listening and answering. And from another spiritual language, a prayer is a sort of communion with one's deepest self, and ultimately, the true prayer is the one that produces the result. Not because who's to say whether you're talking to God and whether God is answering, or whether this was just tapping into some facet of the subconscious. I mean, these are all words in the end, and what matters in the end is
the fruits.
What is the fruit of it?
The fruits.
But is something lost? Is the baby gone out with the bathwater if one takes that perspective? Because to me, that's kind of a big step to take. It's an incredibly simplifying step, in a way, because you realize that all of the theological sort of baggage that's gone along with how we think about prayer and how we think about God and all of that, we realize, all of this is just language devices, language games that are true to the extent that they work.
Do we have a good idea of what it is when it's working, though? Where are we in that understanding? Like, I prayed for the car and I got one, or I prayed to be more spiritual and I got tests. I'm great, I'm good with that. That's what I wanted, because they're different. And if we're praying for what we want, is what we want a pure motive, and if we go, it worked, I got what I wanted materially, maybe you weren't being given anything, or maybe you were, but So I wonder if what we believe we're getting, and that when our prayers are answered, like I find that I pray and nothing happens, and it's like, oh, and I've heard people say, yeah, you pray and it doesn't do anything, doesn't work, and I've never had my prayers answered. I go, no, you always have your prayer answered. The answer is no.
Yeah.
That's just,
There's a great gospel song, "He may not come when you want him, but he'll be right there on time." I love that. And also, I think of that, like, imagine some people not on prayer. Like, it's not working. Like,
Say that again.
imagine some people when they're not on prayer. Like, it's like their medication, or like
Yeah.
the thing that,
not on drugs.
like, if they weren't doing it, what would happen?
What would they be like?
What would we be like if we were not on prayer?
I remember when I was a child, I don't know what grade I was in, third or fourth grade or something like that, and I got an ear infection. I would often get these ear infections, and pressure would build up behind my eardrum, and it could become extremely painful. And I remember once, in the midst of this intense pain, saying the healing prayer. And halfway through the prayer, my ear completely, like, all the pain suddenly went away. And this was like a key event, in my early spiritual life, and I was convinced at that moment that prayer works. That God answered the prayer and, like, completely relieved. I was in intense pain and then suddenly no pain at all. And that was like kind of a signpost in my, like, understanding of the world for years. And now, looking back on it as a cynical adult, I'm willing to entertain the possibility that was just a coincidence, and some pressure was relieved behind my eardrum at the same time I was saying the prayer. But what does it matter, right? The fact that it happened, and the fact that it produced the result that it did, it was like a foundation stone of my sort of belief about how the world worked for a period of time, and that had a certain result that I don't regret. I think my life would have been less rich if I had gone through it, without that belief.
I don't know, there's something really unsatisfying about the idea of prayer works. I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean that there is a magic key, and if I use the right words or I have the right posture of heart, all of a sudden I shift from misery to happiness? The penny drops and the world falls into place in some kind of a way. And is that really what it means to go toward God? Shouldn't going toward God be finding my way into the heart of God, whether it makes me miserable or not? Should I go to Gaza and help some kids out and risk being shot up? X works? Is that the spiritual path?
It was
Is happiness
for me,
what it's all about?
It was for me when I was in grade school.
Yeah, for a child maybe. I
Yeah.
can see it. I'm not trying to
I don't think of it in
disparage
that
your
way
experience.
anymore.
Yeah.
I think of it more back to what Catherine was saying, that God is in the real, whatever that is. If it's real, God is in that. And so if it's happening to you, willed or unwilled, a joy or an affliction, we can learn something from it. I mean, that to me, that incredible gift of being able to learn from our experiences. I mean, just think what a gift that is, that we're not static, that we can change, we can learn, we can feel it as a bounty rather than a subtraction. I think of Gary's my just dearly beloved friend, Kevin Jeanscale, who died on Christmas morning a year ago. And he was a person more afflicted than anybody we've ever met. He lost his wife and daughter in a car accident over Mount Hood in the winter, and then he remarried, and then his second wife, found out she had stage 4 cancer and died, and she was his primary caregiver. And he needed care at that point because he'd been in a freak ocean accident at the beach, and one of these weird waves came in and just crashed him to the floor of the ocean, and it broke his spine, and he was quadriplegic for the rest of his life.
His name was Joe?
One
His name was Joe.
incredible subtraction after another. And he's probably the most spiritual person Gary and I have ever met. He was so on fire, in love with two entities, Christ and Abraham Lincoln. But he just, he had his frustrations. He'd get pissed off at things now and again. But basically, he was the most spiritual person I think we've ever encountered. And he just, it was a struggle for him to see God in his reality.
Yeah.
But he kept being open to it and being open to it. Imagine every day of your life for years and years, you wake up and he couldn't move from his neck down. And he was totally dependent. And he'd been, this amazingly accomplished person who was a chief of staff to the city commissioner and started all these foundations and helped young people find, vocational positions through unions, and everything was an act of service his whole life.
High school basketball coach. He's a real athlete.
Yeah. So it was, but he accepted his reality. That's where he found God. Not without probably cursing at God sometimes.
Yeah.
That's the test too. Suffering puts you through a test. Can you stay, if you're gonna, most people may fail, some people may fail the test and be like, I don't, forget God, there's no God,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And but if you just stay in the path and stay steadfast, and you become stronger from it. But yeah.
Ironically, Barb and I are studying the Baha'i faith throughout all this time, visiting him. And what gave him the most joy was receiving this little piece of bread, Holy Communion. And we would give it to him. And it was like,
a week we just
yeah, we go over there a couple times a week. And he was always so grateful. For him, this was Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And for him, you are what you eat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So all of the...
And he was so incredibly grateful, for the small acts. It's just, it's like somebody had just bestowed a bounty of treasures on him. It's amazing.
Oh, circuit
Hi,
breaker. Hun, are there writings? I'll go down and turn it on. Are there writings, though, that also talk about how if it's not of joy, then it may not be God?
Interesting.
I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I have to give that a think.
Because maybe the pain and the suffering is man-made, and then if it's joyful and if it's of love and of light, then that is actually true connection.
And on the other side, maybe like what Perry said, if what's happening is that you simply can't find a joy and purpose in the suffering that you're in, then something other than God is
in the way.
Swallowing you up.
Yeah, I think it's usually ego, but yeah.
Yeah.
The thing that I think from all of these, the one that I read, the one line, the tests and trials of God take place in this world, not in the world of the kingdom.
Yeah.
That to me
interesting.
put a
Yeah.
big change in the whole perspective of the conversation. Because everything we've more or less been talking about, we're almost looking at this world as that's it. You know, why is it a suffer? Why do we have to suffer in this world and all this stuff? But when we remember we're spiritual beings and this is just one beginning stage of our existence, all of that learning that you're talking about, the fact that we get to learn, it's part of what the process is. And we will continue on, and in the kingdom that suffering will not exist anymore. We won't have the opportunity to learn from our mistakes and our behaviors and the free will that we have. We won't have that in the next world. We only get to have it here. And so having that awareness makes the suffering, you know, like Catherine was saying, it gives a reason behind it.
Purposeful.
And it's purposeful, and you go, oh, I'm in school right now. You know, and I need to graduate. And I need to take advantage of this course, you know. I'm not going to get a chance to redo it, you know.
It's not, it's not only like individuals that have to suffer, it's like institutions, the United States itself has to suffer.
Countries.
The Baha'is of Iran are suffering, they're sacrificing and they're suffering for the advancement of the Baha'i faith. Like, the more that the regime attacks the Baha'is, the more that promotes the Baha'i faith. I think Shoghi Effendi even said that the Baha'i faith is going to grow twofold. It's going to be from the actions of Baha'is promoting the faith and from teaching, and it's going to be from the 50% is going to be from the enemies of the faith.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, and that's when you feel like it sounds weird, but we need to take advantage of that suffering.
Yeah.
In a sense, in the best way possible. You know, in other words, it's going to happen, and if we just say, oh, that's too bad, and not try to do our best to make the world a better place, you know, that suffering is being wasted.
Yeah, right.
So I have kind of a question, and maybe it's way off base, but Christianity seems to imply that suffering comes from original sin.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are other Christian theologians who say, well, it's all about original blessing, not original sin. But so what is the relationship between original sin and suffering? Because suffering seems inevitable in this life.
Mm-hmm.
Does it even matter to try and go back to the origin of it and say it's because of this, that initial separation? I don't know.
I guess to try to put the yes before the no. The yes would be, although the Baha'i writings don't have a concept of original sin as it has been understood in Christianity, it has something kind of roughly equivalent, which is ego. You know, we're all born with an ego. That's, you know, the wolf you feed kind of thing. And that's something that is, you know, original to human nature and something that we all have to struggle and fight against. So operationally, it doesn't sound like it's all that different, although theologically I know it's a huge thing in Christianity. And that would be the no part, is that, you know, for Baha'is there is a sense that there is that there's a concept of original sin that stains the human race as a whole. But if we read these quotations on sacrifice, the first quotation I think touches on that question. The very short one, but a very beautiful one. I don't know where we were at. I think it was
Harry was last.
Harry was last, so you're
So I'm
next.
next.
Yeah.
Sacrifice. This is the true sacrifice, the offering of oneself, even as did Christ, as a ransom for the life of the world.
Look at me and be as I am. You must die to yourselves and to the world. So shall ye be born again and enter the kingdom of heaven. Behold the candle, how it gives its light. It weeps its life away drop by drop, in order to give forth its flame of light.
Beautifully written. Until a being setteth his foot in the plain of sacrifice, he is bereft of every favor and grace. And this plain of sacrifice is the realm of dying to the self, that the radiance of the living God may then shine forth. Do all ye can to become wholly weary of self, and bind yourselves to that countenance of splendors. And once ye have reached such heights of servitude, ye will find gathered within your shadow all created things. This is boundless grace. This is the highest sovereignty. This is the life that dieth not. All else save this is at the last but manifest perdition and great loss.
Whatsoever may happen is for the best, because affliction is but the essence of bounty, and sorrow and toil are mercy unalloyed, and anguish is peace of mind, and to make a sacrifice is to receive a gift, and whatsoever may come to pass hath issued from God's grace.
Soon will our handful of days, our vanishing life, be gone, and we shall pass empty-handed into the hollow that is dug for those who speak no more. Wherefore must we bind our hearts to the manifest beauty and cling to the lifeline that faileth never. We must gird ourselves for service, kindle love's flame, and burn away in its heat. We must loose our tongues till we must loose our tongues till we set the wide world's heart afire, and with bright rays of guidance blot out the armies of the night, and then for his sake on the field of sacrifice fling down our lives.
But Christ, who was the Word of God, sacrificed himself. This has two meanings, an outward meaning and a true meaning. The outward meaning is this: since Christ intended to promote a cause that entailed the education of the human race, the quickening of the children of men, and the enlightenment of all humanity, and since promoting such a mighty cause, a cause that would antagonize all the peoples of the earth and withstand the opposition of every nation and government, was bound to bring about the spilling of his blood and lead to his crucifixion and death. Therefore, at the moment he revealed his mission, he offered up his life, welcomed the cross as his throne, regarded every wound as a balm, and every poison as sweetest honey, and arose to instruct and guide the people. That is, he sacrificed himself, that he might bestow the spirit of life, and perished in body, that he might quicken others in spirit. However, the second meaning of sacrifice is this: Christ was like a seed, and this seed sacrificed its form so that the tree might grow and develop. Although the form of the seed was destroyed, its reality manifested itself in perfect majesty and beauty in the outward form of the tree.
Nearness to God is possible through devotion to Him, through entrance into the kingdom and service to humanity. It is attained by unity with mankind and through loving kindness to all. It is dependent upon investigation of truth, acquisition of praiseworthy virtues, service in the cause of universal peace, and personal sanctification. In a word, nearness to God necessitates sacrifice of self, severance, and giving up of all to Him. Nearness is likeness.
I see why Abdu'l-Baha was called the most great branch.
Have you heard David Hunt's song from that quote?
No. Well, I must have.
Soon will our handful of days be gone.
Yeah.
That it's the service song.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, that
Best
makes me
song.
cry too.
One of my favorite songs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, well.
No, that's a
That's not
different
the one.
one.
Oh, is it
But
different?
there
I
is
think I've heard David.
his is
No, I
his has other lyrics embedded.
Yeah.
That one's like the pure quotation.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Maybe it's why in childbirth, it feels like God is so near. I mean, it did for me and all three of my children. Because it was probably those were the first times in my life I experienced utter surrender. I don't think I'd ever.
What else can you do, right?
I mean, what else can you do? Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the metaphor. We spend so much of our energy as resistant energy rather than kind of flowing energy, just surrendering
Like
energy.
to your point, yeah.
Yeah.
Fastest way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even for Baha'is, like giving to the fund is considered a sacrifice, or giving money, donating money, giving money to the Baha'i fund. And those, and I guess when you know it's a sacrifice when it just hurts just a little bit, the money that you're giving away. And it's sort of interesting to think about, like, okay, it's hurting a little bit to give this amount of money away, but I'm also should feel joy about it. So is it like hurting, or am I supposed to get joy from the hurting, from the sacrifice? So it's kind of conflicting with each other.
But it's actually a cycle. It's like the natural cycle of water, for instance, in the world, in the earth.
Mm-hmm.
It evaporates, it moves, and so to me, the best is when it's a win-win. The sacrifice, you can't actually ever really sacrifice because you're given so much in return, and so either way, it's accepting and receiving the grace, and it's passing that along again, and keeping the cycle going.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that win-win is not. Like, yeah, I used to struggle with that because, you're not sacrificing if it doesn't hurt,
Yeah.
You're not suffering. It's like, yeah, but I like doing things for people,
Yeah.
because I'm getting something in return, and it's meant to be that way. It's lubricant for the process to keep moving if we're doing it right, I think.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, where does the idea that in order for it to be worthy, you have to be in pain? You know what I mean? Like, where I wonder where that comes from. My guess is that's very Western.
Yeah.
A very Western idea that if it's negative, then it's real.
Maybe we're combining suffering and sacrifice, trying to make them all into one thing. Let me just get this
conflating.
all done at the same time.
Okay. Yeah. Well, what I was
Because I'm
thinking
supposed to
is,
suffer and I'm supposed to sacrifice,
Yeah.
so I'll just make them all.
yeah, like where does the notion that suffering, like if you're suffering, you're better. I'm just curious where that comes from.
Yeah.
And because I've seen power structures, systems use that.
When you say better,
Yes.
what do you mean?
It's
Better
good
than
for
someone
you.
else?
It's
Oh.
good for you.
Well,
Or-
this the whole thing is.
Or systems. There are systems based on the idea that your suffering is good for you, and it's used as subjugation, and how spiritual concepts, religious ideas are used to oppress. You see it in oppressive systems, and just this notion of getting people to believe that their oppression could be the best possible thing for them, while other people get to rise or gain or.
But that oppression, in all of those scenarios, even in religious ones, are from other human beings. It's coming from another
Yeah.
person, not from God necessarily. In other
But
words,
what do we take on ourselves? Like, what might be coming in? What cultural messages or messages might we receive? When you live in that, when that is what you know, then, so like, if you're happy, is that bad? I mean, I think there are some people who really believe that you should be miserable and unhappy if you really are pure and of God. I do think that there are people who are like that. And the notion that wanting joy or wanting happiness is somehow a little off. That's not
Greedy.
That's not That's not really the goal. That's not.
and that's where people confuse pleasure and happiness.
Yeah, there's a difference between and this is all semantics. At some point it becomes semantics. I mean, I don't know what those words mean, everyone has to kind
No,
of
but
figure
you're
that out.
talking about dysfunctional behavior that causes a lot of suffering at the hands of somebody who has a skewed idea of reality.
Yeah.
Because they, hurt people.
Or if you're a parent and you raise your children, like, not to go after something, or a joy or happiness, or not to seek it, or to be long-suffering, or...
Well, suffering
Or,
is sanctification.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, yes.
I remember, I wrote a book with a priest who talked about his time in seminary, where they,
Yeah,
he would be in a
flagellation.
little cell and
Yes.
he'd be flagellating himself, and that was a kind of purification or sanctification.
Right.
So
And how often do we do it where we're not necessarily doing something physical, but we're doing mental things to
Mental.
ourselves, or we're not allowing ourselves to do, this thing that could bring us joy because we're not of God. We're pure if we don't do these things. We're better.
Yeah, I've struggled with a sense of it's not really service unless it's unpleasant.
Right.
No, really. And it's
Right.
like, where did this come
Right.
from?
Right.
But I recognize
Yes.
that if I'm enjoying it, then I must be doing it for myself
Right.
rather than
Right. I think a
than
lot
for
of
others.
people do that. I think a lot of
And
people.
I know intellectually that that's totally messed up, right? That service is joyful, and if it's not joyful, then how effective is it really? But I think you're right. I think there's something in our culture. I don't know if it comes from Christianity. That's kind of my sense, but I don't know.
I don't either. But
Probably goes back a lot further than that, actually. I would think religiously, because it seems like that's maybe Judaism, perhaps, if we're going to blame a religion.
let's go back to Moses.
Yeah.
Zoroaster probably.
Yeah.
But one of the things that is so powerful about the Baha'i faith for me, that there is a sort of a transcendence of a sort in the pursuit of virtue. So if you're doing something, I remember this famous Jesuit priest who was a clinical psychologist and an extraordinarily beautiful spiritual man, would make fun of people who would take that attitude that you were mentioning, that somehow if I do it and it is satisfying in some way, that it's really only about me. And he basically said, give up on that. Everything you do is actually for
right,
you.
right.
That's not a bad thing.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And so, like, the idea of pursuing virtue is really where the service lies, is that if there is a need, and humanity needs something, and I have the capacity to support someone who's suffering or fill a need, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day if it makes me feel like I'm a good person.
Yeah.
Because I'm supposed to be a good person.
Right.
And yet, you do get into that sort of masochistic frame of mind that somehow I need to be giving up something. But there is kind of truth in that too, because the ego is so seductive. So I don't know. I just chalk it up to the oneness of God. He's all there in both ways.
Yeah, maybe.
And at the end of the day, the measure is: are you actually being of service? Are you actually offering kindness to someone who's really suffering? Or are you, like Lynn Joy and Roger, going and singing for people when they're close to death? And to hear Lynn Joy talk about what she experiences when she'll go into a space of, a dying person who's very close to the edge, and just offering these healing sounds. And she's researched with her friends who are doing the singing. I think she's probably the only Baha'i among them, but they're all doing the same thing. What is it that gives you joy, you who are moving close to the edge of your life? And they find the answer to that, and then they learn the song, and they sing their heart into it. So virtue, I think, I guess in the Christian tradition, it's, by their fruits you will know them. I think there's language like that in the Baha'i faith too. That at the end of the day, you don't just get all hung up in your head.
Right. Because
Just
when you do that, you're actually coming right back to yourself again.
Yes.
Right? When you become overly worried or obsessed about it, it's actually back on you again.
Yes.
Here we go again. Here's me again.
And what the simplicity of it at a certain level is that it's not that hard to see when virtue is operative. You see somebody who's suffering and you can give them a glass of water, or you've got a struggling student and you're going to hang out with them after school so that they can, now I get it, thank you. There's something beautiful happening, it's all service, and you know that it's right. I mean, God gives us that gift of having the sense of that, even though it can degrade into something that is being done for ourselves. But as long as you hold on to the cord of this clearly is a good thing for some other person, and I can hold it to that, and even if I need to move my own spiritual growth in the direction of seeing how this really was a part of me that wanted the good of that person rather than just wanted me to be the good person being the good person. You work your way into that. It can happen. It's not that much complicated.
You can have win-win.
Yeah.